how do we do that? Is that what we want to do? Do you think we should do that? Questions of access are really important. They go to the heart of what we do, how we do it, why we do it. And those are deep, deep discussions. And that's why one of our working groups is really centered on access. I'd like to invite our guest speaker, she's hiding behind Gerard, Victoria Scott will continue us on our journey. She has joined us today from the state of Maine and has a really fascinating personal story to share about some of how higher education in prison and related pieces were carried out in Maine. And she's fabulous. I've heard her a number of times. Victoria, thank you for joining us.
Hello, everyone. It is an absolute pleasure to be here. This is my first time in Virginia. I served between 7 and 8 years. Time is a sticky thing, especially behind bars, isn't it? The clock starts to blur on you. I was released, a little over a year ago now on the Maine Department of Corrections' SCCP program, which is Supervised Community Confinement. It's like probation plus a little bit. And when I was released, I became the Strategic Initiatives Coordinator for the Educational Justice Institute at MIT. I am a former inaugural fellow for the 2023-2024 Alliance for Higher Education and Prison Fellowship, where I was able to engage in remote work opportunities from prison and be paid a living wage to save toward my reentry. And I was also capable of engaging in professional development opportunities that allowed me to work my way into a leadership position where I became a project manager for the Alliance's Education and Action Implementation Guide, which advises employer partners, student professionals, HEP programs, and departments of corrections on how to structure, implement, and install these programs into their own facilities, businesses, and programs, and how to do that in a way that honors students, but also is mindful of security practices, because we all know that's important, right? I'd like to touch on a theme that I noticed between panels, and it just spoke to my soul so deeply because it really was my story. It's the story of so many incarcerated learners and allies and organizations that are here to help really serve the purpose of rehabilitation, of humanizing people, of redemption, of second chances, and of coming to the same table to collaborate. It's such a joy to be in this room with such diverse groups of stakeholders coming together for the collaborative interest of Virginia. And I'm starting to see hints that you're walking the path, toward what we were able to establish in Maine, which is a humanized system of normalized rehabilitation that allows people chances for opportunity to self-actualize and to support the becoming process. And that theme was relationships. Relationships with each other are so important. That community building, that allyship, being able to partner with many organizations and toward a common goal. But our relationships with ourselves, especially as incarcerated people, are one of our biggest hurdles. I know before I came to be incarcerated, I really didn't think much of myself. I didn't think that I was pretty or smart. I didn't think that much of anything that I did had a lot of value. And a lot of that led to the choices and actions and behaviors that would precipitate me going to prison, but would also brighten my future ultimately and allow me the time and the space to reevaluate not only who I was, but who I wanted to be. When I entered prison, it was the first time in my life I felt safe because I was thinking, wow, it really doesn't get worse from here, does it? So, but rock bottom is a solid foundation to build your future from. It's stable. And I took my first deep breath and finally felt safe and thought, okay, who am I? And who do I want to be when I leave? My philosophy is that reentry starts at intake. And I was going to be darned if I wasn't going to invest every single moment of my sentence in that becoming process, to leave as the woman that I had never dared to be and couldn't figure out how to become when I was in life. And the first thing on my agenda is I want to go to school. I want to learn. School had never been a great experience for me. As a youth, I was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. And as a girl, nobody really knew what that meant at that time in the mid-2000s. And with other neurodivergent conditions such as ADHD and anxiety. And it was hard for me to find purchase and footing in educational programs that were rigid and structured and didn't understand me. And could make no room for the way that I thought. They were telling me what to think, not how to think. But when I began to engage in education from the Maine Department of Corrections, it was a bit of an uphill battle. They did not have a matriculated degree program for women. And I was told to wait at first when I approached leadership. Wait until you get to the reentry center. Then you can enroll in an associate's degree program. I was thinking, you want me to wait 6 years to be a better person? You want me to wait? You want me to wait? I couldn't wait. And that was the first time something in me stirred and woke up where I was demanding not only better for myself, but for the people in leadership positions who had a duty to me for my care and my well-being and to help support my growth. So in my desperation, I wrote letters to a lot of advocacy organizations and to anyone in the Maine State Legislature whose name sounded good to me, and to our Deputy Commissioner of the Maine Department of Corrections, who I'd interacted with on a walkthrough of the facility he was doing. And in this plaintive letter, I begged, please don't make me wait to become who I was always supposed to be. I just couldn't figure out how. And I actually received a response that was encouraging and supportive and said, trust that we're behind you and you will be going to school. You have the facility's support. And I was the first woman from the higher security facility, the Women's Center of Maine Correctional Center, to be enrolled in a degree program, and one of the coveted and limited pilot slots for a second chance Pell experiment. It was difficult. I was a student taking 2 online classes, for starters, with no internet access. So that was a fun challenge, but I was certainly up to it. I remember the very exciting and somewhat stressful days of the week where I would have 1 hour of supervised access from a blue HDMI cord in the classroom with the teacher, who was actually supposed to be focused on her high-set students, but she had a heart for me. And she is an absolute champion. I'd like to call out her name real quick, Abby Embry-Turner and Lisa Whitus from the Maine Department of Corrections, because I would not be here today as a formerly incarcerated degree-holding scholar without them. And it was that love and support that really gave me the encouragement, but also the pressure that I felt to succeed for the women who would walk after me, the women who would need this opportunity and wouldn't know how to manage that. And when COVID came, I know a lot of doors closed, but windows of opportunity opened, and that was a Zoom window. The Educational Justice Institute at MIT has 2 co-directors, Lee Perlman and Carol Cafferty, both my current supervisors, who were in negotiations with Dr. Ryan Thornell, the former Deputy Commissioner of the Maine Department of Corrections, and they parlayed a little bit to work out an opportunity to take their Inside Out course for MIT philosophy courses across the state line via Zoom, and to open that window of opportunity at facilities in Maine, where we had a lot of firsts together. We had an outside cohort of MIT students taking this philosophy course with us, and we had mixed co-ed cohorts between facilities in Maine who were appearing via Zoom, supervised, of course. But we got to engage with some of the most challenging, riveting material that I have ever been able to discuss in a forum of intellectuals and people with such surprising and interesting depth of life perspective. And we informed the process for a lot of very privileged students who didn't know things about nonviolence as a way of life or what it was like to struggle and to meet adversity. And we offered a lot to that course, and I saw something stir in my classmates within the facility that opened their eyes and their minds and their hearts to what they could be, that same becoming process. I can't tell you how many times when I was in the Maine Department of Corrections as the counsel substitute, which is basically like a D-board defense attorney, where I heard someone say defeatedly, I'm a criminal. What do you expect when they catch a disciplinary infraction? And that was so heartbreaking to hear, because I knew what it was like not to think much of yourself, to expect the very worst, because it always felt like life was happening to you. Like you couldn't lead yourself or others, and you had no idea about the immensity of potential that you held. And I also saw that when the education program expanded and we opened up our Women's Liberal Arts Associate's degree through a prison education partnership with the University of Maine at Augusta, and introduced wireless internet access and laptops to that new student cohort, I saw that shift. I started hearing, what do you expect? I'm a criminal, a heck of a lot less. And I started hearing people excitedly, brag to everyone else in the unit, oh, well, I can't do that. I actually have to be off to class, or I've got homework, I gotta study. Suddenly there was purpose. There was this new vision of themselves and this new image that they were starting to step into, to lead themselves with more certainty and more grace, and to act as a contributor within our internal community. You would see peer groups form where students would teach and mentor each other, which is so important. From our panel earlier, talking about how students can support these programs. And first, a lot of that is voluntary, right? Informal programs, just peers connecting with and trying to support and help each other. And that's where my journey to paid work inside began. I took both of those MIT philosophy courses and sucked the absolute marrow out of them. I wanted to take it for all it was worth, guys, and I did. And after that, Professor Lee Perlman had asked the Maine Department of Corrections if I and another student who was inside with me could be teaching assistants from the inside, not only to the inside students, but to the outside students. Our education coordinators on the inside were very relieved, because they were like, oh great, you can field the copies and explain to students the answers to their questions, and I can cope with my enormous caseload to make sure that people are getting access to education. And we all thought that was a fair deal. And we got to interact with the outside students as if we were equals, because in that space we were. Education is the ultimate equalizer. These positions start as voluntary, but it sets you off on a path that opens so many doors to opportunities that will come after. It builds trust within the facility and the rapport that you will have with correction supervisors and administrators who will see that you really want it, that you're making investments, that it's not always about the incentive or gain, but the gains will come later. And starting off in these voluntary positions, there started to be opportunities for stipended work. And that was my first side hustle and gig in the Maine Department of Corrections, was sitting as a member of the University of Maine at Augusta's Prison Education Partnership Advisory Board, where I was paid $200 a month to join as a group with stakeholders from the Maine Department of Corrections, from the university, from other community colleges and partnerships, and with directly impacted people who would inform the process of identifying barriers for students and engaging in some creative problem solving. I was on the infrastructure group, so we were talking about how to expand internet access. And also writing grants. That was the biggest thing that I did, and I've heard that discussed, and I can't underscore how important that is enough. Being able to have re-entry and transitional academic services for students who have not yet completed their degree program, because I'll tell you something, when I first got out a year ago, I hadn't quite finished. I was about 6 credits shy of my bachelor's degree, and the grant that I wrote meant that there was an education re-entry specialist who was employed through the University of Maine at Augusta to check in with me, to help serve as an intermediary, to connect me with services and resources, and it also paid for that laptop sitting on that table over yonder so that I could continue to access my coursework and communicate with my professors. And I'll tell you something, I finished just before commencement happened in May. And I was able to walk with my class. My niece and nephew who had been struggling in school and playing a little bit of hooky because they take after the rest of us in the family, both came. And when I first came home into the apartment that I was able to pay for through my work experience on the inside, I sat down at a table with them and showed them pictures from the event that I participated in with the Educational Justice Institute at MIT, where we talked about prison education with the entire New England Patriots team.
Wow.
Yeah. And they thought that was pretty cool. So that gave them kind of new hope, and I was telling them how important education is even if you can't see it now, even if you don't know that you want to go to college, the rooms that you will be in and the work that you will engage in will lead you to other opportunities. It will connect you with people who will see something in you. And that's very worthy. You don't know yet. When my nephew saw me walk across that stage, he looked over at his dad and whispered, "Dad, I want to go to college." And he had never said that before in his life, because it was, I don't know, before that. He applied to the University of Maine at Orono and got early acceptance for an accounting program. And I am so proud of him. He sent me a screenshot on Snapchat, and I just couldn't celebrate enough. I did a 10-minute touchdown tea party over that. Education in prison and workforce opportunities from inside the walls heal generational cycles. They relieve the hopelessness and the identity disorders that we carry in us that led us there in the first place. They allow us to connect in a productive way with authority figures, with our peer groups, with advocacy organizations and educators, and with ourselves, most importantly, because we can't relate to anyone else better than we relate to ourselves. From the inside, all of this education and all of these opportunities, taking part in the National Prison Debate League with MIT, a group of us that had members from every facility got together, and we went toe-to-toe to debate the MIT debate team. It was a first ever. We connected via Zoom. It was supervised by an administrator. We were able to email to form our arguments. We prepared and sharpened them. And we totally beat MIT. Swept them 5-0. And that was a huge moment. And it was that moment, being recommended for that opportunity by a professor at MIT that I had taken classes with and served as a teaching assistant for, that led me to meet Ved Price at the Alliance for Higher Education in Prison. And he couldn't believe what we were doing in Maine with internet access and being able to engage in such a variety of educational programming. The fact that we were sitting on a Zoom for practice between facilities and having these co-ed educational experiences that were monitored, yet had a certain flexibility and freedom to them that allowed us to relate in a healthier way between genders and between different stakeholder groups was highly impressive. And he was thinking, so if Maine's open to this, are they open to internships, fellowships, advisory board opportunities? And I told him, you should ask. Worst they can say is no, right? But they did not say no. When negotiations opened for that, and when the original post came out for the application, I approached my education coordinator, knowing that I really needed the opportunity to actively apply what I was learning. It's one thing to have confidence in a classroom and to be able to pass your quizzes and to write papers, and it's a whole nother ballgame to be in a room of peer professionals, of career environments, and to be entering that space as an incarcerated person with little to no experience or with a huge resume gap that makes you feel a little inadequate and uncomfortable, right? Knowing that you have been out of those spaces. Are they gonna see me as a professional? Do I really know what I think I know? Is it gonna translate from my academic experience? And this is where it's important for employers to have trauma-informed training, or to be able to work that out in real time through these professional relationships with incarcerated people. That is how we contribute as well, in addition to our work efforts, being able to inform them as employers about what it's like to be understanding of carceral spaces and environments, about how many things are out of our control, but about how hungry we are to try to prove ourselves, to be able to contribute something that matters and serve as a credit to our community, even from the inside. These living wage opportunities are so important for incarcerated people. And again, that just feeds that relationship with self that we're healing. When you're making slave wages, working an institutional job, you don't feel important. You don't feel like society needs you. And you almost feel like nothing you really do in any direction matters, because the effect that you're seeing, the value attached to it, is so small. It's a drop in the bucket, right? It's hard to see yourself as an empowered person who's governing their own life, whose actions affect themselves and others, and whose contributions matter. But being able to support living wage work opportunities, remotely or otherwise, vocationally, that does a lot to mend that relationship for incarcerated people with themselves, for them to see themselves as equal scholars, equal workers, and equal members of our community. That's what it did for me. I was able to work my way up through my fellowship opportunities, save money, real money. I was able to send my brother money after he was in a life-threatening motorcycle accident, and he was struggling financially and with his recovery. And that meant a lot to him. We were on the phone and he was, in tears saying, "Victoria, you're the one who's in prison. I should be sending you money. I should be supporting you." And I told him, "You're my brother and I love you. You got a lot of medical bills. And you got a steep hill to climb, and I want you to know that I'm here to support you. And I'm sending you this support because I can. Because I have been blessed, that means I can bless you." And it meant so much to me to be able to offer that to him, even from the inside, because it closed that distance between the wall and my brother. I was able to save up enough money to pay first, last, and security on an apartment so that I could self-sponsor my reentry, instead of being forced into communal housing that maybe wasn't the best fit for me, or having what I like to call forced reliance on social support systems, which are great for the people that need them. But if I could be in a position where I didn't have to need that, I could leave it for someone who's worse off than me. I didn't have to beg my family for support, or worse, be afraid to ask them because I didn't want to be an inconvenience. And when I applied for that apartment, this is my favorite part of the story, y'all. I think you'll appreciate this too. On the listing online, it said, "No felony convictions." But it was my dream apartment, guys. There's a bathtub almost big enough to swim in, and a glass wall shower, and a guest room for when my brother would come up to see me. I needed that apartment, so I talked to my dad on the phone and sent him as my emissary, and I said, "Okay, here's the plan. Go talk to the landlord, lead with the felony, and then show him my resume, and tell him about the work I've been doing. I'll send a report card from school if you want." And he did. He went and talked to the landlord, and the landlord listened intently and then took a pause and said, "All right, well, can she prove she can pay for it?" And I sent my dad a bank statement that afternoon. Next thing I knew, the landlord was passing the keys off to my dad. I was able to come back into the world after, I think it was about 18 months of work, with a $30,000 financial safety net, where I could buy my own groceries. I could run my family reunion dinner at my very nice new apartment, and I could sustain myself until I had locked in the job with MIT. I was able to help others around me and also support myself, because the DOC was willing to build trust with me, was willing to invest in me, was willing to support me, and because I was willing to offer that same effort in their direction by supporting my peers, by championing some causes, and by having some very difficult conversations, but also contributing to that creative problem-solving process where we could structure this system in a way that was safe. I know Mr. Carroll said on the panel, that comment about giving people enough rope, but also about focusing on individuals. And I'd like to revisit that statement because it's so important for people in positions of authority, because if we truly want to improve the quality of life for incarcerated people and for our communities, if we truly want safe communities, we have to make these investments. Y'all remember that RAND study that says for every $1 invested in education, you save 4 to 5 on reincarceration costs in a 3-year period? That's still true. This is how we lower recidivism. By getting people to re-identify themselves not as criminal, but as scholar, as professional, as a family member, and as someone with a civic duty not only to themselves, but to others. I was paying taxes from the inside, and I gotta tell you, I was kind of excited to do it. I was talking to Kenneth earlier, and I know that'll wear off at some point, but so far, it still helps me see myself as an American, as a contributor, as somebody with something to offer, and not just an invalid, a felon, a societal throwaway. Society needs me as much as I need it, and we all need each other. So when we create these systems that create that sense of accountability that Mr. Carroll was talking about, it's so important to bear in mind as we're trying to implement these structures and mind security concerns, that this is our opportunity to teach people how they can make safe mistakes and what the consequences for those mistakes are on an individual level, how to step up and take accountability. If you send an email to the wrong person, that's a conversation, right? And that's also a reduction in your level of access, but just for you. Maybe you can earn it back if you can earn trust back again. But we can always address these situations according to their severity. And that's important because we want to preserve our investments, both individually and collectively. I found more often than not, a lot of students are putting in such a tremendous amount of effort and are taking their future so seriously after they reframe themselves in their mind, after they make these positive peer connections, professional connections, after they form these networks and engage in these opportunities. They're far less likely to misuse that opportunity because it becomes our lifeline. It's something that we want to protect. Gotta check my time here because I know I might be running over. I do talk a lot. It's the storyteller in me, it's hard to tame. But I also would like to invite any of you to ask questions if you'd like to know more. I would love to share my experience, or if you have technical questions about how these systems were structured. I did engage a lot in the formation of the Maine model and the building process. Shout out to Randall Liberty, our commissioner, and to our director of professional development and adult education, Laura Rodas, who really championed this cause because they believe in it and they understand this is how you can be smart on crime as a system. So thank you all so much, and feel free to ask me anything you want to know.